You know the deal here at Mark Rogers TV. We're looking at every position in the SEC and naming our top 5. Most recently, I looked at the defensive linemen. I came up with a solid list of 14, and I said we got to split up the DNs and the defensive tackles. We haven't done that in the past. Probably should have. It's two different positions, and we've knocked out the tackles. Let's look at the defensive ends. First, the caveat here is that we would have C.J. Johnson in our top 5. We did initially on our list, but just a few days ago, prior to spring practice in Oxford, Ole Miss head coach Hugh Freeze said, moving C.J. Johnson back to Mike linebacker. The Rebels have been decimated by graduation losses and injuries there at linebacker. They need some experience. They need a guy that knows the defense. They're moving C.J. Johnson back to his high school position of linebacker. They can try it out for the spring. If it doesn't work out, he can always go back to end, and he will take his rightful place in the Mark Rogers TV top 5 list at defensive end. But as it stands, we still go back to Ole Miss for the number 5 defensive end in the SEC. He's Marquis Haynes. He was 8th in the SEC with 7.5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. Freshman All-American. He exploded onto the scene, had a sack in his very first game against Boise State at the Georgia Dome. He had a great 2-week stretch in the middle of the season when Ole Miss really took charge and made a statement in the SEC Western Division when they took on Texas A&M on the road. He had 2.5 sacks. He was freshman of the week in the SEC. Very next game at home against Tennessee in a 34-3 rout, he was defensive lineman of the week in the SEC. Again, just a baby, just a freshman last year. He's 6'3", 220. The coaches would like to see him bulk up to 230 or 240. Marquis Haynes, not a huge recruit as a 3-star, but came in and lit it up with 7.5 sacks and 9 tackles for loss at Ole Miss. We move to number 4 and a guy we didn't even see play last season. Auburn's Carl Lawson. We saw him most notably near the end of Auburn's championship run in 2013. He was opposite Dee Ford, and he caused all sorts of havoc. He is a game changer. If Auburn can get him back, get him healthy, he should be ready to go this August, should be ready to go when the Tigers hit the field in the fall. 4 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss during the 2013 run. He was dominant, though, down the stretch, way beyond those numbers. Again, he's a redshirt sophomore coming into 2015. I've got Auburn's Carl Lawson at number 4. Tennessee's looking pretty good at defensive end. Number 3, we go to Derek Barnett. Listen to these glossy numbers out of a freshman. 10 sacks. That was 4th in the SEC. 20.5 tackles for loss. He had 72 total tackles. That's a lot of tackles for a D end. He had 8 quarterback hurries, so he was in the backfield all the time, around the ball all the time. Again, 30.5 combined sacks and tackles for loss as a freshman. He had his first sack in game 5, so 5 games into the season, no sacks. He still finished with 10, 20.5 tackles for loss. I love Derek Barnett at Tennessee, and we're going to hear more from the Vols in just a minute. Then we go to number 2, and a guy that everybody was talking about, again, another freshman. So these kids are young. Myles Garrett, Texas A&M, SEC freshman record, 12 sacks. That was 2nd in the conference behind Shane Ray. He had 13 tackles for loss. He was 2nd team All-SEC. Even in the losses against Missouri and Ole Miss, he was a standout performer, had great games in those 2 situations in the SEC. Blocked field goal against Auburn, returned for a touchdown in that upset win that really turned around the Aggie season, gave them a shot at postseason play. Went on the Plains, were a huge underdog, and again, Myles Garrett blocked field goal for a touchdown. Number 1 defensive end coming out of high school, and he is quickly becoming the number 1 defensive end in the SEC, if not the nation, again, as a freshman with 12 sacks, an all-time record in the conference. And at number 1, kind of a hybrid. He's played linebacker. He's a defensive end. He's a stand-up guy. He doesn't like to get down in a stance. Curt Maggit of Tennessee missed the final 2 games of 2012, had the horrific torn ACL, missed all of 2013, and came back in a great way in 2014. Vocal, emotional leader, great game changer. This guy was the main reason why Tennessee's defense went from 84th in the country in 2013 to 37th last fall. He had 11 sacks. That was third in the conference, 15 tackles for loss, shoulder surgery, missing spring practice here, should be ready to go in August and ready to go for the Vols, who are a dark horse in the SEC Eastern Division. Curt Maggit, the senior, the number one defensive end in the SEC, followed up by Myles Garrett of Texas A&M. Then we've got Derek Barnett of Tennessee. I like Carl Lawson of Auburn at number 4. And at number 5, Marquis Haynes of Ole Miss, just a freshman last season. Top 5 DNs, difficult to select these, especially with C.J. Johnson possibly out of the mix. Need to hear from you. Let's talk up the SEC's 5 best at D-end right here on Mark Rogers TV.